discussion of the novel kind of finishing up here. I have a bunch of questions here, but I wanted to start with a kind of a very general one. You know, what did you think of this one? Just open floor to general BSing with a very serious purpose, because people think that's a term that everyone laughs about, right? But oftentimes, when you start to kind of think in that way, you identify themes that then that are actually quite important. So let's just start there, and then we can work to my more specific questions. Marina.
In the beginning, when it was kind of confusing and weird how they had different points of view.
Mm-hmm.
Was it third person? Or was it like the first book, like Hawthorne?
Uh-huh.
So that was interesting.
Yeah, so we have this third-person narration that moves. It's the technical term that the literary theorists use for that is a focalization, where the storytelling is oriented around different characters that are put in the foreground. It's pretty obvious because it goes with the chapters, right? But it is an omniscient perspective. The narrator knows everything here. Yeah, so that, of course, you can go back to Todorov, which is our kind of our bigger genre point about how this all works. And in a way, we have a little. I mean, it's so interesting to think, like, what kind of novel is this? A whodunit? I mean, it's also a police procedural for sure. But it's interesting to think a little bit about, it's not really a thriller, is it? There's no threat to the investigation or to people who are these killers don't really ever threaten anyone or imply a danger to others outside in the investigation or outside the investigation. Emily?
I like how it began with the conflict between Christine and Reinhardt and ended with the resolution of that. And then sandwiched in between, of course, was the crime with Ryan and Jonas. But I just like how the author, although there's a huge difference in importance, you can say, between a crime and then just one person's or one couple's relationship, I think she did a good job kind of evening those issues out.
Okay, so
those two separate
crime. So it's also, there's a relationship story there. Is that kind of what you're saying? Part of what you're saying? Yeah, that where this relationship gets impacted by the crime, and then that's part of the way of talking about changes there. Tao?
I like how the books have many twisted up events that make the reader thinking, and then in the end, it's the ending is unexpected ending, and then just a completely turn of twist up event and nobody expected.
Okay, so unexpected twists that provoke reflection. Is that? Yeah. So. Gabrielle?
I feel like there's lots of kind of finger pointing blame in the book. Once something happens, then it's really easy to just jump on certain people. Oh, a kid disappeared. Quick, that guy used to be a pedophile all the time. Go talk to him. Or, they oh, we find out that it's not that guy, but this other guy's taking a kid, and then a second one disappears. Oh, it's obviously got to be him too. It can't be anything else. Or
so do you think that's? What are you saying? Do you think that that's a reflexive kind of thing? That is that the author is doing that to make you think about how you might do that, or do you think that's kind of a clumsy literary style where it's sort of a lot of rushing around and pointing of fingers?
No, I think that it's legitimate. I think that it's something that Fossum might be bringing up to say, our society is really good at kind of pointing fingers and trying to place blame on other people. I think that it's also easy to try to criminalize people for more than something they might have done.
Okay, so the blame game in a way criminalizes, and in criminalizing, where the reader's forced to ask, is this legitimate, and what are the consequences of it? Okay, Austin, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I was
maybe less sense of identification because of these shifts in perspective. Yeah, other just sort of preliminary thoughts? Yeah, Christine.
My main complaint with Copperheart was that it wasn't validating or satisfying
Mhm.
because there's no way you could have known.
Mhm.
And it's pretty much the opposite of that, where if you read the entire thing, you can start thinking about it on your own, and the ending's not a total surprise.
Mhm.
There's a little bit of a twist.
Mm-hmm.
And just the two styles, when you compare it to each other, like these two books right next to each other is interesting. Because it does have elements of a whodunit. It has a couple elements of a thriller. They try and bring it in by saying, oh, he's going to strike again. Oh, he took another kid.
Mm-hmm.
But it stays pretty well within the genre.
Okay.
And Copperheart definitely is in its own little.
Whodunit genre, yeah, or subgenre, whatever you want to, depending on how you use the terms. But yeah, there's, if you go back and look at which is the next thing I wanted to do, look at the very opening chapter, right? There's the bunker, and there's the supermarket and so forth. There's the lake, right? That the title in English comes from. It's another thing we can talk about, the titling of the novel. But it sort of paints the scene, right, in which this all transpires, and tries to suggest fates and clues that will become issues in the novel. Actually, let's do that. One of the things that came up in a previous meeting was someone was asking, well, what's the point of the last paragraph of the novel, right, where Reinhardt is reflecting? If you notice, it's italicized, and so is the first paragraph in the novel, the first chapter in the novel. And so what I'd like to begin by doing and looking at the novel, then we'll just ask you, what's up with the last paragraph? I'll turn it over to you, and before you start doing that, how do you answer that question? This is about method or literary criticism, which is also part of this course. How do you go about answering it? Like if you look at it like a passage in a novel, how do you what are some of the methods that you can use to make an argument about what it means? What what it means suggests there's like some fixed meaning that you can identify, you can sort of like unearth from it. I don't think probably that's the case. It's people read the novel in different ways, and you can show evidence to introduce different interpretations. But the question is, what's the evidence? How can you identify evidence in this last paragraph, say, and maybe connect it to the first paragraph? Any thoughts real quick? Anyone? How are you going to do it, in other words, when I say look at the last paragraph and tell me what it means? Anyone? Some thoughts? Some BS? Right there, yeah. So, but how would you find a pedophilic tendency in that last paragraph?
The way that he's imagining that there's that girl.
Okay, so you could say the specific image and the way the image is described, and the way the image is described, right, is about figurative language. Okay, so that's one thing to look for: figurative language. What do you see? What are the metaphors by figurative language? I mean, are there metaphors there, similes, metonymies? Things like that. Metonymy is, right, a part of something representing the whole. So the White House stands for the U.S. government, right, or the executive branch, because the White House is an integral part of it. But metaphors are making associations by way of difference. He was a lion, right? He's not, of course, really a lion, but that talks about how brave he was or how ferocious or whatever. So you can look for that kind of figurative language. That's one thing to do. Gabrielle?
Well, I feel like the suggestion of him being a pedophile...
Before we go into like the specifics, I'm thinking about method here. Like, how are you going to read the passage? What can you look for? Yeah.
Like keywords?
Keywords there that are, language repetition. Often in literature, many kinds of writing, repetition is what really matters, where some words get introduced early in the novel, and they don't have to be continually recurring. In fact, if they're always there, we tend to think of that as very clumsy. But if they come back at certain times, that can be a very strong clue that creates associations, right? So repetition of language. Another one might be allusions, right, where there's an episode where we're in a character's head or something like that, and then that episode is recalled to mind by that repetition of language or some other, maybe some association or something in the character's head. But allusions to other parts of the novel can also be evidence? Schwinn?
Irony.
Irony, where something gets emphasis because maybe you get so clear the character's lying to him or herself that you're like, wait, what's going on here? And then you kind of lean into that passage and say, oh yeah, there is something more going on here. So irony, right, when someone says something other than what they mean, or they're clearly deceiving themselves, and the reader knows more than the character, those kinds of things are ways of laying emphasis on. So there's 4 things right there: figurative language, allusions, irony, and repetition of language that might be present in a paragraph that help you, that offer evidence that allow you to make an argument about what's going on there. So let's think of those or other methods. Do you want to add something, Gabrielle? Okay. Okay. So using those to think about those as methods, let's turn to that last paragraph and just take a read through it, talk about it with someone sitting next to you, and what we're asking is, what's going on with that?
And so even though it's like where I'm sensitive,
Okay, let's hear what people thought about this this closing paragraph. Yeah, what's your name again? Kalina, right?
It said something about a red raincoat, and then that reminded me of, like, in the beginning, they were talking about Christine wearing a red raincoat, and then the setting was like, they were in the forest, and, like, the child appeared, right? So then this child could be Christine? I don't know.
Okay, so red raincoat, there's like a kind of an association of color that suggests, that connects this child at the end to the wife. So red raincoat, Christine, red raincoat in chapter 2. I think that's where we kind of go into the action in chapter 2. I thought too, after we talk about this a little bit, we can then connect it to think about the opening paragraph also, or the opening chapter also in italics, right? So there's clearly an attempt to associate the beginning and the end, and often people think of that as an elegant way, right? The circle's closed, where you begin with some image or some language that then recurs at the end, right? It's like the overture in a piece of music. You hear the strains, the themes are introduced, you go through all these different variations of it, and then you come back to it at the end, right? That creates a sense of completion. Same with a novel. So, yes, but the Red Raincoat. Emily, right, yeah.
Yeah, also, like, Christine's kind of, like, small and, like, have, like, a childlike body, kind of just like a doll, really small, and he likes to take control of her, kind of like, I don't know.
Okay, so Christine is small and childlike, which plays to Reinhardt's sense of control, right? He's obviously someone who likes to be in control, and perhaps part of his relationship to his wife, who's like diminutive in stature, is about sort of this notion of control. Schwinn?
I feel like when he writes that she was a coward, reflecting a lot of his own feelings about himself, maybe.
Okay.
Because he seems to emphasize that in the beginning of it, that she was an absolutely human, when we obviously seem to then translate that he was a coward.
How should I put that? So that he says she's a coward, but that's like a projection, right? We all know that that's a very common psychological thing, right? That how does it go? I screwed up. They hate me, right? Or however it works, where you sort of project onto others the problems you have. Actually, in this class, so someone pointed out to me, maybe people in the business school know this. What is it called? The fallacy, like where the evil is always the externalization of your own. Where our tendency we take the credit, but we externalize the fault, right? So that when things go your way, it's because I was so good at it, right? At least in your own mind. And then when things don't go your way, you're like, oh yeah, well there were all these circumstances that caused things to fall. It's like some kind of organizational principle that, anyway. But a little bit of that same sort of logic, where she's cowardly because of faults of his own, and it's like the projection onto her. There's maybe more there to that way of thinking about it. Emily, did you want to add something?
Yeah, something I noticed was like from the fact that it's raining and he's just kind of like I think the image of him sitting there in the rain, like while it's getting in his shoes and getting him wet, like I feel like that's just very outside of the norm, and it's just kind of like an eerie image. I don't know.
Okay.
It kind of like makes it seem kind of psychotic.
Yeah, so it's about character. You can also think of the element of water. Oftentimes water is in films and novels and so forth as a kind of, it can be cleansing, right? Where water comes, there's like obviously notions, religious rituals, baptism, things like that, where a new beginning. But also water can be very dirty, right, where you get wet and covered in the dirt of the water and get pulled down into the murk. It's hard to, different ways to think about water, many more than that. Charlie?
One of my other classes in high school we spent way too long on symbolism. And I remember, like, any sort of, like, rain or, like, being dunked in water, that's, like, a symbol of, like, rebirth.
Okay.
And after, like, Christine's left him, he's now open to all these, like, he can, like, technically, like, kind of, like, recreate himself, and instead of pursuing Christine who, like, looks like a child, he might just end up pursuing children, which is why he's, like, fantasizing about this.
Okay, so Reinhardt is reborn as a pedophile at the end of the novel?
Yes.
There we go. Bold reading, I love it. That's what you got to do, get the evidence and go for it. But yeah, so there's something that's happened. Maybe it's a common it's a common figure of some sort of renewal, water, right? As Charlie observes. And something maybe is happening here that connects the eeriness to that rebirth. Christine?
I don't have a copy of the book, but when he says he's going to smile at the girl, it's like the same words that Brian Brain, whatever his name is, said to the cop when he was describing what August got in his car.
Okay.
He's like, I turned on, I had like this Hollywood megawatt type smile. There's nothing to see to do, so I was leaving. And that's exactly what Reinhardt's saying. It's like, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do this.
Okay. And so it's like the control, that the emotional projection is a fantasy of control. So this is a fantasy of control at the end of the novel. What's your name again? Cindy, right?
We talked about that too. There's other parallels between Reinhardt and Brian. Like both of them, their wives left them. The very first sentence in the last chapter talks about like going home to an empty home. Like Brian was in an empty home constantly. They kind of saw the red raincoat parallel to Jonas's red shorts.
So let me just say one thing very quickly about this. See, we've talked about the same thing for a little bit here. This is what I oftentimes on people's papers, I write the comment like more detail or like analyze details. This is like analysis of details where you're making connections between like the red of the shorts and the red of the raincoat. The author didn't. That's not a mistake, right? Someone's making a conscious choice to make those sorts of associations. It's up to you to make sense of them, but that's the way literature works. And so when I say look for details, that's what I'm asking you to do. Get down there close and notice things, and then make a case for what their connection is. That's the association between Jonas and this girl at the end. Certainly, it's pretty convincing to say it's a Reinhardt's a pedophile in some way or another here. That's what, the suggestion. But it's very ambiguous, right? Yeah. What's your name again? Kirsten.
Well, I thought, because he was talking about being in a park this time, and as far as this novel goes, like, I associate park with the guy who's an old pedophile.
Okay. Right. He sits in the park and watches the children, right? So we'll also say pedophiles. How should I put this in a neutral way? Pedophiles sit in parks. Yeah. Austin.
What was his name? The first pedophile they talked to?
Philip.
He also, in the book, it says he flashed with his dazzling smiles. They used dazzling and moving, and they said to find freedom.
Or we can have a little repetition of language of our own. That's not really an ad. Well, look at it. Didn't correct it. Pedophiles smile dazzlingly. Right? So but yeah, this is that repetition. Now, the thing is, of course, is like, I mean, why doesn't the novel go farther than, why doesn't it give concrete evidence of Reinhardt being a pedophile? It's kind of a rhetorical question, but it'd be very easy to sort of, when Christina's like looking through his stuff, she could just, like, the guy's always on his computer playing computer games, she could find some child porn stash in his computer, right? Or something like that would be damning evidence, but it doesn't do that. Why not? Just if anyone has any thoughts about it, yeah, go ahead.
I guess to keep us from thinking that he's part of, like, more than what we already think he is as part of the crimes.
Okay, so withhold association, right? So that it's not like you want to put the blame on him and sort of it becomes suddenly he's the criminal. It would be a distraction. Pete?
I was going to say, they might try to make it too, so it's like the pedophiles have very similar characteristics for people who might not be pedophiles, so they might consider that's how people can blend in really easy stuff, so you don't really know.
Okay, so it's maybe that's a technique we've seen throughout the novel, right? This kind of like making ambiguous associations to spread the blame out or to cause some sort of raise some moral questions. And so maybe here it's not saying he is a pedophile, but it's associating him with these pedophiles in ways that ask us to think about what he thinks and what he does. Charlie?
You said, like, when he was playing video games and she could, like, find child porn on his computer, and she was looking for
did find a picture of
Right.
some anonymous little girl that he was just like hiding.
Right. But it's kind of like a head. It's not like a porn shot, right? It's like a headshot where she doesn't. Her shoulders are bared or something like that. And it's. I think it says first. Well, maybe this is his daughter or whatever. Where it's. You can look. It's on page 149. You can look at it if you want to take a look at it. Where it tries to make it a little bit more. And it could be a lot more damning. Let's say that. Caitlin.
Making it ambiguous with him kind of it lends a sense of danger continuing to lurk, and that sort of feeling that anyone you know could be at that tipping point, I guess. Because I mean, basically, what they're showing, if you read the end of the novel that way, what they're showing with Reinhardt is mental process, not actual action. So it's that sort of, danger's still out there. You never know when.
And so, and what is the mental process? What's the mental process you're talking about?
Well, I mean, just the way, it's hard to tell with the italicized paragraph, whether it seems more sort of like a more fantasy-like than actual event happening, and that's how I read it. So it's more sort of like, and along with like the picture that he had in the house and the obsession over the crime, he's thinking about, maybe his thoughts are starting to go the direction of thinking of doing something that's criminal.
Right. Okay. So maybe thinking about something. One thing is that what's he thinking about? It's like this fantasy of control, right? And just point out that there's a technical term for that, ekphrasis, where the imagination of statues. It happens a lot in literature. So this is an ekphratic moment, you could say, if you want to go, sort of full literary on it or literary critical on it. And oftentimes when people talk about those ekphrastic moments, the thing they point out is the statue is a representation of the individual. But what is the statue? It's frozen. It's lifeless. It's the ultimate object of control, the artist's control. And so when you freeze something in a statue, you emphasize its control in the medium and by the sort of the agent of its imagination. So certainly that's like, you could say that as a detail that supports the idea that he's really fantasizing about control here. And in fantasizing about control, he's fantasizing about a child, and that resonates with this broader theme of pedophilia as about the control of kind of the helpless in a sense. Jake?
I took it in kind of completely different direction.
Okay, go for it.
The last paragraph. I thought it wasn't like sexual or involving pedophilia at all. I thought actually because his wife had just left him. And it was expressing more, because the entire book we see him as kind of the shallow guy, kind of just selfish about the investigation, and he never wanted kids. And I think now that his wife's gone, it brings up this kind of his inner self, where maybe he did want kids, maybe he did want a child of some kind. And that statue, that's frozen in time there, symbolizes how now that's never actually going to become a possibility. That child's
Great.
never going to walk out of the forest, come to life, and sit on his lap like this kid might.
Right.
The child being naked doesn't resemble sexuality of any kind. I think it resembles more of an innocence that he's not going to be able to have a part of his life anymore because his wife has left him. And then in relation to the picture that's found in his desk, I think that might have had that because he kind of dreamed once that he might be able to, because the picture itself isn't expressed in a sexual way. It's maybe a dream that he might be able to, have a daughter of his own one day, and that you find this among all his the passports and all these buried files because it's buried underneath himself, and only the things that are shallow are actually being shown through him. Excellent
way to use evidence, and I will encourage people to don't let the class go in one direction to discourage you from seeing your own way. So I'm glad that there are multiple perspectives on it. But yeah, this is the image of loss, right? Nostalgia, regret. And the reason the child is frozen as a statue is because it's inaccessible. It's not alive, right? It's what could have been, but never was. And so this is the moment where he screwed it up, and in part because of his need for control, he's now paying a price. His wife left him, and so forth. So that, and then as Jake neatly pointed out, some of the other evidence that gets brought up earlier could be read in other ways. Yeah, Cameron.
I feel like the beginning and ending were kind of like bookends for Ryan.
Okay.
And Brian. How it was kind of like an ending at the beginning for Brian, where he had tried to hold out and not give in to his urges for so long, and he finally it ended horribly because of course Jonas eventually died, and then the end of the book is kind of showing in my opinion, the unleashing of at least Reinhardt's more primal and possibly pedophilic urges.
Okay, so that the opening of the novel is
it's kind of the culmination and the ending of Brian's problems throughout his life with dealing with being attracted to children.
okay. Brian's problems explode, and so then the end is like a parallel. Then it's Reinhardt.
Yeah, and it's the beginning of his.
And so then you have like the kind of the cyclical character of these sorts of things that they both link back to earlier experiences and carry on in other lives. Jennifer,
Yeah, I agree with what was just said.
with Cameron or with
Cameron.
yeah.
In addition to that, I was going to say that in regards to Reinhardt's possible pedophilic nature, why it was ambiguous, maybe it was the author wanting to give different parts of how a pedophile's behavior seems to be. Because at the beginning, we learned about Philip, and that was like the after phase of after being caught and being in repentance, that was his life after all of his actions. And then we had Rain in the middle, after he committed the crime, we saw what it was like for him. And now at the very end, it was kind of the full circle coming back to the beginning again, with Reinhardt maybe giving him his pedophilic.
So Philip, Brain, Reinhardt. So it becomes a kind of a lineup of these three guys that are associated in various ways, and becomes a kind of cycle of the development of these criminal pedophilia. Yeah, Sarah.
It's really going back to more the nostalgic and less pedophile now, I guess. I saw it as a lot of parallels between him and Christine, like the irony that the whole time, like she had mentioned, looking at her swing and imagining there was a child there, and like all the rooms, she has all these rooms in her house, they're all empty, and now it's back to him that he's the one who's alone, and he's imagining children. That's the irony of how he's screwed up.
So these figures of kind of emptiness and lack of occupation. The statue that fills the place of the living child, the empty swings, and so forth. So that's that kind of repetition of language, repetition of these figures that one might argue are part of that a reading that emphasizes that. Jake?
I think calling him a pedophile is almost jumping to conclusions. It's talking a couple of reasons that we haven't established yet.
Okay.
And I think part of the reason is, if you look at this last paragraph, we know, throughout the book, he's kind of a jerk. But, there's a large gap between being a jerk and being a pedophile.
Right.
Look at this last paragraph. His wife has left him. He's not going to have kids anymore. He doesn't really have anything left in his life. The investigation's over with. He doesn't have anything left to dwell on. And so he's going to sit, in the rain by a statue of maybe what could have been. And I think that, labeling him as a pedophile because it's a statue of a naked girl and he's just like standing there, I don't think that's necessarily a reasonable assertion.
Right. So because some pedophiles sit in parks doesn't mean everyone who sits in a park is a pedophile, right? Yeah. So that we can see that there. I think it's a good point that's just sort of step back for a second. Making the argument, it means taking those steps, showing a logical chain that gets you to the argument. And Jake has challenged us to think about, can we make those steps with Reinhardt? Yeah, Tao.
Yes, I was reading, and the last two sentences of the last paragraph, I think it suggests that his idea say that things will return to the way he wants. It's just emphasis on his control now, and then they talk about the rental, they're gonna come back.
Okay.
I think it looks more like he's gonna take control again, and the wife gonna come back to him just
okay.
like the way before, because she is too little and she cannot depend on anything.
Okay, so it's about control. We see that this is one of the things that is like the issue in their relationship, right? Is control, and that this is a fantasy of reclaiming control, right? On his point, which is, pedophiles are the only people concerned with control in relationships, right? Pretty universal phenomenon. And so this is just to sort of emphasize the more general rather than the more specific. Gabrielle?
of like, I don't know, like society is going to be fostered like through the children, so it has lots of negative impact on the children, then those children will have negative impacts on society as they're growing up too. I think you can see in like the kids that were friends with Edwin, and there are a couple other things in the novel too. But I think that with Christine in this really toxic relationship with Reinhardt, she's always portrayed as this child, and then finally when she just says like, "I had enough. Finally, I'm going to leave," it's almost like she's like grown out of this child phase, and she's going on like now. Earlier in the book, it was talked about like, oh, a child can't take care of another child, so she's leaving. Like she's no longer this like little child that's being controlled by Reinhardt all the time. She's gonna go have her own child.
Okay, so Christine is associated with children throughout the novel. She wants children. She's small in stature. There's these things that depict her as a child, right? And at the end, and the child is immature, can't take care of him or herself. At the end, she matures out of her childhood, her figurative childhood, and sort of takes control and leaves this relationship. And so this is about, one more for reflection on the child in the novel and both and their relationships. So that's another way to see it. One other thing we could do here to reflect on this a little bit, the question I want to end with, is the title of the novel, The Water's Edge. And I think I mentioned that I know there's some students who study Norwegian here. If you look on the title page of the novel where the copyright information is, you can see that the title of the novel in Norwegian is Den som elsker noe annet. I can't speak Norwegian, but I'll try. Someone who loves something else, or the one who loves something else. And I want you to let's take a second to think about first the Norwegian title, The One Who Loves Something Else. What's that title? I mean, as I pointed out before, it's not a controversial statement to say the words of the title are often the most important than words in the novel. They tell us in some ways about the theme or the main character. What does that title in Norwegian mean, you think? The One Who Loves Something Else. And then you can also take a second to think about, as you're talking with that, the English title, The Water's Edge. What's the thinking behind those two titles? Usually it's the translator or the publisher who chooses the title in English, so you can criticize it or like it or whatever, but the one I want to think about more is the Norwegian title, The One Who Loves Something Else. Let's take a few minutes to think about that in small groups, then we'll talk about it as a class and kind of end there. So in talking about it, what I would like you to do is try to connect it to the novel as a whole. Make an argument about the novel as a whole, its themes or its main issues based on that title. Yeah.
Like she's in the first page, and it like takes up the stuff here, and like the last page is one gray, and then there's that one red color, where we still have it searching for it's gray, and then it's another and it's just like green. I mean, it's like, or it's like right it's like why like crossing.
Yeah. Like on the edge of the
You can make that argument.
Yeah.
We gotta finish up here. Okay, let's hear what people had to say about the title. Casey. Yeah. Uh-huh. Okay, that's a great point, even to make the water connection, right? We end with rain, begin with a lake, so that the water's edge, there's a lot of water there. You could, if you wanted to, you could look for water elsewhere in the novel and think about it. Yeah, so, I mean, people point out different kinds of associations with water and so forth, but it's, you know, it can be pristine. I mean, it starts in a very pastoral kind of tone, right, where it's this sort of still landscape description, setting the scene, and further, you know, the water's edge. It's a very static kind of title where it's a setting, right, where the crime occurs rather than the naming of a protagonist or giving a kind of a thriller title. Even the one who loves something else refers to someone who's doing the loving, right? Whereas the water's edge, I mean, just like a place somehow, and a very generic place, somewhere we all know what a lakeshore is like, right? But it's not the lakeshore, is it? Could be that, too. Sean? Okay, so crossing onto the water, like there's a natural boundary, the water's edge, marks a border. You know, I mean, if you want to go crazy on it, like maybe a little bit too literal-minded, the pedophile who goes over the edge, right? Reinhardt at the end, but certainly you could make that point. Jake?
I think the water's edge kind of showed what the detectives were dealing with in the book, and that they were standing on solid ground, looking kind of out in the expanse of the sea, and with they're standing in their own society, they're looking into to solve this crime. They're looking into a society that's not like their own.
Okay.
Like society conforms to who you should love, who you
right.
should be with, and pedophiles are completely different.
Okay.
That water is different from the land, and they
okay.
look into it without actually being developed.
Looking into another universe, another world where that's obscured, right, by seeing through the water. You can't see through water very well, and this is to look into that world is to look into something else. And that maybe resonates a little bit with the Norwegian title, The One Who Loves Something Else. It's like what makes the pedophile different from the investigator is that person loves something else that's not fully comprehensible to the investigator. So like looking into water is like looking at these relationships that don't make sense in a way. Kaya.
We were talking about
Uh-huh. Okay. Okay, great point, yeah. Unreciprocated love, right? Where to love the one who loves something else, it's not like they loved each other, right? But it's to love almost like something else. It's not someone else, but something else. There's a sense of objectification there, right? In a way, that's the problem with the novel suggests with these pedophiles, right? Is they objectify children, and in objectifying them, take their take from them their childhood, their innocence, right? Obviously, it's more complicated because these monstrous boys that are also part of the novel. But even in the end, that last image, what does Reinhardt do? He objectifies the child in the statue. So loving something else could be a kind of an objectification. That's an old-fashioned way of thinking about what is love. Love is to love someone as your. It's like a golden rule thing, right? What is to love? To love truly is to love someone as you yourself would be loved, right? To treat someone as a full individual, as an end in him or herself, not some object that you can use to satisfy your own needs and desires and whatever. So that might be one way to think about that Norwegian title. Christine, you had your hand up. Okay. Other thoughts here about the title? Really, thinking about the title can be super convincing evidence for a bigger account or bigger argument about the novel, if you can make sense of that stuff. Other things people had about the title here? Yeah, Jennifer.
I'm relating it to one of my personal experiences, but like when I was younger and I went to the beach with my family, I would often play at the water's edge. Like, run up to the water and I'd stop before I touched my toes.
Yeah.
But in relation to the novel, I feel like maybe it's kind of the author wants us, the reader, to contemplate like more of the personal, almost forbidden things in society that people normally don't want to talk about.
Yeah.
The elephant in the room.
Okay. Yeah. So go to the edge. Go in. It's actually interesting when you say that. Personal experience is that the water's edge. Anyone been around kids at the water's edge? Or Jennifer said she was a kid at the water's edge. Go to I was at a Koalak last summer, just camping with my family. And so if people have been out there, right, it's the Pacific Ocean, beautiful beach and so forth. And or if you've ever been to the seashore, it's just amazing to watch kids at the water's edge. They can go all day long, running into the ocean, out of the ocean, playing in the waves, playing in the sand, right at the water's edge. It's like this, I swear to God, it's like a universal. Kids just love that beach right at the edge of the water. And so in that way, right, it's a figure for the change from childhood to adulthood. There's lots of ways you could, run with the water's edge, the English title of the thing. But it's kind of striking image that Jennifer brought up. I'm just sort of, I guess, stealing the attention from you by bringing up my own personal experiences. That's the worst habit. People do that where someone makes a really great suggestion and you're like, oh yeah, I know that one too, and then you start getting in the way. So, but great reflections on the title and really super reading of the last paragraph in the novel to sort of draw out things. So I think we can see that it's about pedophilia, but it tries to make that both ambiguous and generalize it about problems of love and relationships to others. All right, so from here we go to the paper and then starting The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo for next Tuesday.